Let's stay with money. In the past 2 years, the number of South Africans undergoing debt review has increased by 8%. Now, this means increasingly we're getting into money difficulties. Let's speak to Quinton Ramohlabi, a quality insurer at National Debt Advisors. Thank you so much for joining us. So just explain to me what actually has been happening regarding indebted South Africans over the past 2 years.
Well, basically, a lot of South Africans consumers have been facing difficulties due to the fact that the macroeconomic issues, and that has been affecting them by not being able to repay back their debts. So firstly, I'll make reference to the change or an increase in interest rates, which basically means that the cost of buying has increased at when the interest rates are higher and the loans becomes more costly, and basically that it is definitely leading or maybe making people abstain from borrowing due to the fact that they are unable to repay back the higher amount of interest rates that has been increasing constantly during the past 2 years, which is 2020 and 2022. And also this makes buying certain goods and services such as a vehicle or maybe a bond to be more costly, and therefore this discourages a lot of consumers by not being able to spend or borrowing due to the fact that they are unable to pay back the amount of interest that has been increasing constantly, like I said, during the year of 2020 and 2022. So, but for those who are already having the unsecured debts, such as maybe credit cards or loans, then they will, meaning that they will have less disposable income. And of course, that is because of they are spending more interest into repayment. So therefore, the other areas, such as maybe consumption, will also fall apart. So those are the negative impact of the macroeconomic issues on debt level among the South Africa's consumers.
Yeah, so it just gets more and more expensive to repay your debt as it's getting more and more expensive to just do the basic sort of food shop, petrol shop, etc. What are the warning signs? I mean, times are tough. I think everyone's feeling the squeeze to a greater or lesser extent. But what are the warning signs that you're sliding into a debt spiral that essentially you are not going to be able to sustain repayments?
Well, basically, people they just need to make sure that they're not going to the banks and borrow money constantly, because, like I said, that the interest that has been increasing constantly during the year of COVID-19, this period of 2 years, they've been more high, and people are unable to afford to repay. And basically, that means that people will have to budget and, of course, not to overspend due to the fact that they want certain goods and services. But I will advise people not to overspend, because interest rates have been increasing constantly, and also prices of petrol, which has been increasing over the period of 2 years. But this year, I believe that petrol increased 3 times, which basically it's something else that consumers need to be aware of, how they need to utilize their finances by not overspending or become impulsive spender.
Yeah, and you know, it's so easy to say, isn't it? Control your spending, but it's so hard to do because there's an emotion attached to spending money. There's a sense, it gives us a sense of security. It gives us a sense of generosity and happiness, particularly during the festive period. So what tips do you have for people to try and control their spending?
Well, basically, what I will recommend or advise South Africa's consumers to do is to create a budget and, of course, stick to it, because that it could potentially assist the consumer to be able to have enough cash flow and save, and, of course, being able to afford their monthly expenses, and, of course, their financial situations will betten up, and not the consumer will be able to see what other things that they can buy or not to buy, not to become an impulsive spender, like I said. So secondly, people need to make sure that they maybe find someone that they speak to, that they can trust in terms of their finances, because, of course, not everyone is having the knowledge of how they can manage their finances. So which I normally, refer a lot of South African consumers to National Debt Advisors, because they've been working very hard for the past 2 years, making sure that they assist the South African consumers to become debt-free, but also by not only making the people to become debt-free, and also these chief executive officers Professor Chanel Collins provide the financial literature to the South African consumers to be able to survive as soon as they are done paying all of their debts. Because at the current moment, we're facing difficulties whereby the expenses keep on increasing constantly. So that is the main thing that I will also advise the consumers to do. So lastly, which has came into the National Debt Advisor's attention, is that a lot of people, they tend to make late payments into their debts. So that's the reason why the numbers keeps on increasing constantly. So we found out that between 2020 and 2022, there was an increase of an amount of 8% of the South African people, consumers, who recently joined debt review at National Debt Advisors looking for assistance. So most of them, they were unable to repay their debts on time. So my advice to them is to set an automatic payment, because that it could potentially assist them by not being able to miss their payments into their debts, and basically to have sufficient and finish paying their debts on time before the credit providers can penalize or charge them interest rates into their debts.